Welcome to the seminar video series, Germanische Heilkunde, by Dr. Gerd Hummer, MD. My name is Helmut Pilhar. I am the father of Olivia and Dr. Hummer's appointed lecturer on Germanische Heilkunde, theory. This seminar video is about the tracks. Everything that is chronic happens via tracks. The track is basically the allergy. And just as one is allergic to grasses with conjunctiva, one is allergic to the workplace with colon cancer, for example. As long as one cannot resolve the conflict, the track causes a recurrence. If the conflict is resolved, the tracks dissolve. The goal is to understand that every track allergy originates in the DHS, which is the biological conflict. Without a track, there is no chronic epilepsy, Crohn's disease, acne, arthritis, dandruff, athlete's foot, and so on. You can learn more about this in the approximately 2-hour seminar video. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the seminar, Germanische Heilkunde, by Dr. Gerd Hummer, MD. Today's topic is tracks, allergies and all chronic diseases. Germanische Heilkunde explains to us how our body works. In my opinion, there is nothing more important. Dr. Hummer has described the complete medicine with 5 natural laws. One property of natural laws is that they work equally always and everywhere. Whether your suffering is a pimple, diarrhea, or diabetes, we can easily verify whether what Dr. Hummer says is true or not true. Up to now, university clinics have refused to carry out an official examination to verify and validate his findings. Of course, that goes against the people. That goes against us. Therefore, the ruling system must allow itself to be questioned. Are they here to serve us at all? Who is this system actually? Who are the heads behind it? The first biological law of nature describes the cause of the illnesses that arise by themselves. I would like to outline the 5 laws of nature now only briefly, and then we plunge immediately into the tracks. The association I make in the moment of shock, whether a morsel conflict, disfigurement, self-value, or separation conflict, determines the localization of the Hummer focus in the brain. This in turn determines the organ disease. If I have a morsel conflict, I have the Hummer focus in the brainstem and react with the glandular tissue. Colon cancer, liver, or thyroid. But if I have a violation of my integrity, I have the Hummer focus in the cerebellum and I react with the glandular tissue, sclera or peritoneum. Defilement, violation of my integrity, the attack. If I have a self-devaluation collapse, then I have the Hummer focus in the cerebral medulla and I react with the connective tissue. Bones, tendons, or cartilage. Suppose I have a separation conflict, a territorial conflict. In that case, I have the Hummer focus in the cerebral cortex and I react with the squamous epithelium, or with functional failure. Neurodermatitis, bronchitis, or paralysis. With the conflict shock, our body immediately switches to permanent stress. We immediately mobilize all our forces to solve the problem. And here begins the therapy of nature. These special programs have nothing to do with good and evil, that is a religion that masters us. This division does not exist in nature, and we humans are part of this nature. Therefore, if something happens in my body, it is neither good nor evil. Good or evil does not exist in nature, but it is always something sensible. And that is what has always been fought so far, at the expense of the patient. With the DHS, the conflict shock, the ergotropic organs are innervated, the brain, the heart, and the cross-striated musculature. Also, the vessels switch to narrow. Therefore, I have ice-cold hands. I have hardly any appetite and I can't get the bite down. And I'm wide awake. On the psyche level, I have obsessive thinking. On the brain level, I have the Hummer's focus shooting disc-shaped. On the organ level, if I had reacted with a morsel conflict, I now have either cell proliferation, resulting in liver cancer or colon cancer, or I have hyperthyroidism. But if I felt a violation of my integrity, I will react with the gland-like tissue. The dermis and peritoneum cause cell proliferation. However, if I have experienced the conflict as a self-value collapse, then I react with the connective tissue, which now makes holes, cell loss and necroses. Suppose I suffer a territorial conflict, or have reacted with a separation conflict. In that case, I react with the squamous epithelium, cell loss. This also called an ulcer or ulcers as the outer skin ulcerates. The same with the stomach ulcer. The program remains active, until the conflict is resolved. Until now, we did not know what the cause was. We now know the cause. Only with the conflict resolution does the cell division stop, the cell shrinkage stops, and the function returns. And note, there are no alternatives to natural laws. To be therapeutically successful, I have to build on natural laws. Every single program has its biological sense, mainly in the conflict active phase. For example, a function amplification by cell multiplication. If I have suffered a morsel conflict, a cell proliferation, it is nothing more than a tumor that produces more mucus. This makes it easier for the morsel to slip in or out. The tumor can also produce more digestive juices, to break down the morsel that was too large and therefore stuck. If I have an injury to my integrity, I react with my glandular-like tissue. The dermis reinforces with mesothelioma, cells proliferate to better protect my integrity, and better defend against future attacks in the same location. In the case of the dermis, it's called a melanoma, which is considered highly malignant in conventional medicine. With peritoneal cancer, it's called mesothelioma. The biological sense is to help me ward off the attack, and better protect my integrity against the defilement, or the disfigurement of the attack conflict. In the case of the squamous epithelium, it will ulcerate to help me resolve the conflict more quickly. I get more air into the lungs, I get more blood into the heart muscle, and I become more efficient. So, it creates functional enhancement through cell loss. There is also the functional failure, the paralysis, and the play dead reflex. If the rabbit can no longer escape, it is suddenly conflictively paralyzed, on the entire body, and appears as dead to the predator. If you put this rabbit on its feet, it sags away. That is the biological sense. Then the predator stumbles, because it is not a scavenger. Prey that is already dead, no longer needs to be killed. Therefore, the predator lets go of its prey and so the rabbit can survive the situation. In MS patients, we don't have to fight the symptom or substitute if something is missing. If some tissue is too much, we don't have to just cut it away. We have to solve the cause. We have to find his motor conflict. Where couldn't he run away, or where can't he get behind? What or who could he not hold on to? That is what we must find, the cause. Only when he could resolve the cause, then the function returns and the paralysis disappears. And the second biological law of nature describes the solution. Only with the resolution of the conflict do I return from the stress phase to the rest phase. As long as I had drawn on my energy reserves in the conflict active stress phase, then I must also recover again in the healing phase. The blue and the red area correspond approximately. If I am conflict active for 1 day, I am sick for 1 day. One does not really feel fit. If I am active with a conflict for a week, I will be sick for a week after conflict resolution. This is called the flu. If I am active with a conflict for 3 months, I will be sick for 3 months. Only then it's called cancer. This is true, no matter which program, for the most part. But then this creates another problem. If I have cancer, it means I have to die, according to the belief in conventional medicine. This is how I stumble into the next conflicts. And this is what our doctors get off on, because then they are the gods. They are allowed to pronounce the death sentence. And we are so stupid and believe them. The doctors don't know anything. They don't know the cause of any disease, and they certainly don't know the solution. Every single healing phase always takes place under swelling, under fluid retention. Here it also says exudative phase. The Hummer focus was shooting discs shaped in the brain, for as long as the conflict was active. But now, when the weight of the stone falls from my soul, I enter a vagatonic, hot, healing phase, and now my edema begins to form. Notice, brain tumors are only connective tissue fluid in the brain, there is no cell division. In conventional medicine, this is called a brain tumor or brain metastasis, and the patient's brain is cut out. Insanity. At the same time, at the organ level, the previously grown tissue is tuberculously degraded under swelling, or the previously created holes are refilled under swelling. The swellings become larger and larger. I then also have hot hands, fever, and the swellings become more and more. Therefore, the pain also becomes more and more. I feel worse and worse, and worse. 90% of patients in a healing phase run to the conventional doctor, the alternative practitioner, or the nutritional guru. And there they may, or may not, have success. After all, there are also tracks or chronic courses. The healing phase is usually noticeable and sometimes, but not always, the conflict active phase is noticeable too. But what we typically call sickness, with fever and inflammation, or infection, or the flu, is always a healing phase. Also, everything that is called brain edema is always a healing phase. And then Mother Nature has built in an essential mechanism, to stop us from further falling into vagatonia. That's what the crisis is for. With momentum, the patient is steered back towards health. All crises are always brain symptoms. Even the heart attack, for example, has nothing to do with the closed coronary artery. Epilepsy, absence, and migraines are all crises, which are always controlled by the brain. The striking crises are those which have their relay in the cerebral cortex. The crises of the cerebral medulla, brainstem, and cerebellum are not as noticeable. One is cold, one has ice-cold sweat. Just before you were boiling hot, suddenly you're freezing cold. Immediately after the crisis, you fall back into vagatonia, and then you take big steps towards health. With conflict resolution, our brain turns on its surgeons, the microbes. These surgeons operate more precisely than any human being with a scalpel ever could. This is because the microbes only ever work in a germ layers dependent manner. Often an organ is composed of tissue from different cotyledons. The conventional physician simply cuts across the germ layers and all the tissues. The microbe works only according to the germ layers, more precisely than any surgeon. However, we demonize the microbes, claiming that they caused infection and therefore would be the contagion. All these things led to superstition and tyranny. I know that may sound crazy, because a technician is telling you that, little Pilhar, but just turn on your head. With that I want to say, trust yourself to find a judgment only for yourself, not what the mainstream tells you, but always remain critical. Of course, you also have the right to correct something today, that you said yesterday. It would be worse if you would insist on continuing with the nonsense. Because everyone has the right to say. Yesterday I was convinced of it, I really believed in it, but today I have this knowledge. You have this right to learn, and everyone should use it. With the old brain programs, a tumor had previously arisen. It was a gland or gland-like tumor. This is no longer needed after conflict resolution, so we need the microbes, our surgeons, to remove the tumor and clear it away. At the end of the healing, the tumor is gone. The colon cancer is gone. The liver cancer is gone. Breast cancer or melanoma are gone. And that's a real healing, without side effects. It costs nothing. The conventional doctor now has nothing more to diagnose, and must acknowledge that the patient is healthy. He has no other choice. Unless, of course, he is lying, and lie they do. The cerebral medulla controls the connective tissue, like the bone. A famous example is a dentist. Suppose there is an active biting conflict, bone osteolysis, which does not hurt. If I can solve this conflict, the jawbone repairs under the swelling. In this process, the bacteria help to again fill the hole in the jawbone. This happens under swelling, and it hurts. Now we run to the dentist. He sees the gum pockets and says everything is full of bacteria, you don't brush your teeth thoroughly enough. This has nothing to do with brushing your teeth. You have a program going, and the dentist thinks the bacteria caused it. In reality, it's like saying, I've been to a major fire 100 times, and the fire department has been there 100 times. I know who sets the big fires, it is the fire department. But that is not true. The viruses, the squamous epithelium, there we have the wart, for example, there we have the liver bile duct, there we have jaundice, there we have a common cold. There we have polio. Another very famous thing we have here is the virus. No one has ever seen a virus. There is no virus photographed ever, not one. That is unbelievable, but we are used to that, from religion and the churches. They tell us about the devil. Ask the priest once, what does the devil look like? Is he small and black? Or big and brown? Superstition and tyranny. Terrible. And according to this principle of the two phases, colon cancer, breast cancer, bone cancer, heart attack, and epilepsy run. Provided that there is a resolution to the conflict, it becomes two-phased. If there are no tracks, then after the healing is completed, it remains as it is. We are healthy again, and again we have the normal day-night rhythm. And it stays like that. I had a one-time episode. With the bowel, the chest, the bone, the heart, or an epileptic seizure, the conflict load determines the length of healing. If the conflict was 1 day, then I will be vagatonic for 1 day. If I was conflict active for a week, I will be in bed for a week. If I was conflict active for 3 months, then I will have a colon cancer, breast cancer, bone cancer, heart attack, or epilepsy diagnosis. That's the magic. Now we come to the tracks. This is one of my favorite topics, simply because this is essential to understanding. Everything that is chronic runs via tracks, no matter what you call it. Whether you call it epilepsy or whether you call it hay fever, or athlete's foot, it doesn't matter, it always runs via tracks. The track is nothing else than an allergy, as I said. Whether you call it an allergy or Crohn's disease or athlete's foot or epilepsy, the mechanism is the same. In the moment of shock, you can look at a person's face and see that he's had a shock. One has been diagnosed with cancer and the other has been told that his partner has died in an accident. The third has a self-value collapse, because his boss has yelled at him. The fourth has a territorial conflict, because his wife has run away from him, and so on. Just look at the face of a person like that. Or when someone pours a glass of water into your lap. Look at this person's face and see what he does. He opens his eyes, mouth, and ears, and at this moment, the Hummer focus is created, in this very second. There are many CT scans, and another just 1 minute later. There was no Hummer focus in the first image and, taken only 1 minute later, there is a focus on the second image. Because the patient has suffered a conflict in the meantime, the Hummer focus is the proof that all diseases develop by themselves, cancer, chronic diseases, allergies, and psychoses, and they have nothing to do with nutrition. They have nothing to do with heredity and nothing to do with infection, but the cause is monocausal, the cause is the moment of shock. You have to check if it is true or not, and this can be photographed. Regarding the psyche, we can ask the patient, did you have such an experience? I can look at his brain CT, and we know where the Hummer focus must be, and we know on the organ level what to look for. The conventional physician uses only one level, the organ level. They are not interested in the psyche, and refuse to look into the brain CT. The conflict is the cause of the colon cancer, breast cancer, bone cancer, and heart attack, and the cause must be understood. What is a biological conflict? Not only what happens in the process, at the organ level and in the brain, but also at the level of the patient's psyche, and what he associates now. That is the cause, that is what everything revolves around. The rest is just an explanation. The conflict must be understood, it must be found. Only then would I begin to consider what to do. I don't have to start at the symptom, but at the conflict. That is the cause, that is where I have to start. Always at the cause. At the moment when the Hummer focus arises, our brain makes a snapshot, like a camera. I possibly remember all sensory impressions that had just occupied me in the moment of shock. This can be explained or compared as follows. You may know the task manager on the computer. When you start a piece of software, it shows the performance of the computer. If I start a program, the computer performance increases until the required capacity is reached. Let's compare the computer with our brain. Let us assume that I am sitting in a room, in which there are no special sensory impressions, nothing special upsets me. My brain is bobbing along on the floor. When it comes to a conflict, my brain has nothing special to store. So in that case, there is no sidetrack. No allergy. But if I just bite into the apple, I have to get my teeth into the apple once. In my brain, the computing power increases. Then a taste sensation comes my way, sweet and sour. The computing power increases even more. My whole brain deals with the apple. Now, when it comes to conflict, my brain stores the apple as a secondary track. If I bite into an apple, I have a recurrence. I will explain in a moment what a relapse is. Then I am chronically ill via the track, apple, and no matter what special program. We speak of main tracks and secondary tracks. The main track is always the conflict itself. So, if I can't hold on, I suffer a motor conflict. Then the main track, the not being able to hold on, is the motor conflict. So, in the future, if I get into a situation again where I can't hold on, I have a relapse. From the secondary tracks, we speak, for example, of the apple, the allergy. Whatever had occupied me at that moment. So, if I then bite into the apple in the future, then I have a recurrence with the musculature. If I suffered trouble in the process, I have a program going on with the intestines. In the future, whenever I get on the main track, I have a recurrence with the intestines. But even if the apple has stored itself and I bite into the apple, then I have a recurrence with the intestine. Although far and wide, there is no trouble visible. There it runs via the sidetrack. Or also about milk. Milk, that is, we humans are a weird species of mammal that drink breast milk in adulthood, from an alien species at that. In order for our body to utilize the milk, the liver has to make enzymes. So, my brain is working, look out, here comes something. Liver, do something. My brain is concerned with the milk and what it should do with it. Now, when it comes to conflict, my brain stores the milk as a sidetrack with it. If I reacted with anger when I drank milk, then I always react when I drink milk. Then my intestine reacts with anger. But if I have suffered a separation conflict, I always react chronically with the outer skin. Whenever I drink milk, neurodermatitis is occurring due to the sidetrack with milk. It can come to one or more sidetracks, but it does not have to. It can also come to 5 different sidetracks. But the main track, there's always that, so to speak. And recurrence means, the conflict itself, the cause, the shock, the DHS, that always has 3 criteria. This is highly acute, so this is not a trifle for me.
It's perceived as isolative. In that second, I can't communicate.
I can't cry it out, and it caught me on the wrong foot. I didn't see it coming. That's what makes a biological conflict, a DHS. That's what causes colon cancer, breast cancer, bone cancer, etc. And to get on the track in the future means, the 3 criteria then don't have to be met at all. It is enough to bite into the apple, it is enough to drink the milk, and I have a recurrence. The original program that was started at the initial conflict activates. The program itself, the symptom, is not the problem, but the cause. Nature has programmed us with these programs as a therapy to solve the cause. Every program has a biological sense. See the 5th biological law of nature. Nature does not make anything benign or malignant. Also the track, the allergy is nothing else than an early warning system, an echo sounder. A radar, beep, 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 watch out. Here comes something again, there was a problem with that before. The milk, watch out. And it already starts in advance with a special program, which should help me to cope with this problem. The problem, the conflict, that's where I have to go. That's why I now react chronically to milk. Lactose intolerance reaction is only the symptom, but the cause is the anger from when I drank the milk, or was forced to drink the milk as a child. And relapse means, the entire special program starts again. On the brain level, a Hummer focus becomes active with a visible ring structure. On the psyche I have obsessive thinking, even if it is unconscious. By the way, we are talking about the vegetative, automatic, nervous system here. You can't control that willfully, it goes past the conscious mind. When a young woman sees a baby, her pupils open. She doesn't know that, and she can't prevent it. Or when a pretty woman walks by, the man pulls in his stomach. That's such a reflex, but the one with the pupils is better. She can't stop that willingly. It is not conscientiously perceived. And at the level of the psyche, I have obsessive thinking. I have the Hummer focus photographable at the brain level. And on the organ level, the programs again have cell proliferation, cell loss, or function failure, until I come off the track again. Until the milk is digested, until the apple is digested. Until the track no longer occupies me, and then I come back to healing. As long as I was active, for that long I will also be healing. Now tuberculosis is reduced again, or replenished under swelling. I have my crisis again, and at the end of the healing, I am healthy again, then I have my normal day-night rhythm again. Until I get back on the track, until I once again drink milk. Or even when I get on the main track. As I said, it doesn't matter what you call the chronic course. The cause is the conflict, and the rest is the track. In therapy, we must always return to this conflict shock and find the associated tracks. Or in other words, every allergy points to the conflict, the DHS. Highly acute, isolative, and caught on the wrong foot. From the organ symptom, we know what to look for. If he reacts with the intestine, it was an anger conflict. If he reacts with the skin, it was a separation conflict. If he reacts with the bone, it was a self-value, and so on. Often it is just said, that he has a milk allergy. Well, milk is the track, but what is he reacting to, at the organ level? If he reacts with the intestine, it must have been anger. If he reacts with the bone, then it was a self-devaluation conflict. We can also narrow it down even further. Was it on the partner's side or the mother-child side? And we also know when it started. When these symptoms first appeared. By the way, keeping an organ diary is never wrong. Writing down your symptoms or those of your partner or child is never wrong. Because it is quickly forgotten. What is unpleasant and hurts, we like to suppress. But we have to find the cause, only then do we know what to do. The animals notice these tracks, and avoid them. I have a recurrence when I get on track. I have instant cold hands. And the animals still consciously notice this and avoid the track. We humans are so much in constant stress. From early in the morning until late in the evening, so that we do not even consciously register this stress, which suddenly occurs due to a track, so we have a relapse. I don't notice the active phase, but I notice the subsequent healing as soon as I am off the track again. I like to tell the animal example, then it is easier to understand. Hummer always had boxer dogs. And the boxers always had to wait for him in the car. The window was half open. A shepherd dog runs past and of course, no boxer tolerates that. The male dog jumps through the half-open window, the female jumps after him. She gets caught, falls and breaks her pelvis, and can't walk for months. The bitch never got into the car again. We placed a sausage on the passenger seat for her and left the door open. She sat down and begged, "Please give me that out here, I'm not getting in there anymore." We humans are so denatured, we keep getting into the car and don't notice that we have cold hands. You usually don't notice the active phase, we build up conflict load for hours. We get out of the car and come off the track. We stay in the apartment and get into the healing phase, but then it is usually noticeable. Only then, we don't anymore see the reference to the car. And then, we wonder why we are chronically ill. The little animal says, "No, thank you, I don't need this nonsense a second time," and prefers to walk. Yes, nature has not reckoned with the fact that man has a nearly fatal traffic accident, and thereby suffers a conflict. The traffic accident does not even have to have really happened. Everyone has his individual perception. One is frightened, and the other is not frightened. And one conflict is enough. The one has now suffered a conflict by driving a car, and nature has not reckoned with the stupidity. The one almost dies in this accident and then still gets into the car, again and again. So, nature could not reckon with this stupidity, of course not. Every little animal behaves smarter and avoids the track, thus avoids a recurrence, thus avoids chronic disease. But we are so denatured that we don't even notice that. We are so distracted, we don't even notice it anymore. And we have to find that out for ourselves again, and we have to get to the bottom of it. As I said, keep a diary like this. So that you can recognize, oh, always after driving, and driving is the track. And after the organ symptom, we also know what to look for, and that's where the car points. And then, you know the cause. Then you can think, how do I get out of this mess? A safe variant is the boxer dog variant. Avoid the track. That's surefire, spot-on therapy. And that is also a biological solution. Many beginners say that's just avoidance, that's not a solution. This is a biological solution. The goose has a right to avoid the fox. Even if the fox says, "Goose, I find that discriminatory of you." And also, you have the right to avoid the mother-in-law. If you can, you are healthy, if you can't, you are chronically ill. And you have the right to change your job, if the boss makes you sick. Nobody can forbid you to get healthy, to solve your conflicts. This is the medicine of freedom. Neither doctor nor medicine stands between you and your health. Because no doctor can heal, and no medicine can heal. Only you yourself. You just have to find the cause, find the track. A track can last a lifetime. A horse that a tall dark man has beaten up will give any tall dark man a wide berth. All of this works through the brain. You see the same with hay allergy sufferers. They see hay work on the TV, and their nose is already dripping. That works exclusively via the brain. And now, there are two groups of tracks. Each track points to the conflict. One group points to an event, what happened there. The traffic accident could happen again today at any time. That would be an unsolvable conflict, for example, and the track is part of the conflict, the track belongs to the conflict. If I can't solve the cause, I can't solve the track. And in that case, I have to avoid the track, only then I am healthy. If I drive a car, I have a relapse. Whether I have understood the mechanism or not, that is entirely irrelevant, it is about the unconscious. The unconscious is triggered. We have to become aware that that is the case. And you can be the best expert in Germanische Heilkunde, you can best have recognized your own conflicts and tracks, know the cause, but when you get on the track, you have a recurrence. And there is nothing you can do about it. And the second group points back to an event that happened at that time. Maybe my grandfather forced me to drink milk when I was 6 years old. Today I am 50. What happened then can't happen today at all. First of all, my grandfather has died, and secondly, nobody forces me to drink milk today. And I know myself from back then, and I know myself today. Back then it was highly conflictive for me, and today it can't happen at all. And in this case, the track dissolves. So in this case, the conflict is actually resolved, because this can't happen anymore. But about the tracks, they hang in the air, and I still had recurrences. Think of the early warning system, beep beep. And when I find that conflict and realize the difference between me then and me now, that can't happen today. Then the conflict is solved. And then the tracks dissolve and then I become healthy. Or rather than I come into the healing phase, and that can also be fatal. I'll discuss that in a moment. So, sometimes conflict resolution is not desired. Yes. Sometimes you have to advise the patient, stay on the track. If you resolve that, you don't survive the next year. There's that too. Or a chronic course stops, and it stops immediately. So, the track doesn't dissolve in 3 months, or after 5 liters of noni juice, at €45.50, or 7 times tapping your forehead and looking back and forth, or going to church to pray 5 times a day. The difference is, can it happen again or not? And if it can't happen again, the track is gone, immediately. There are no more recurrences. And for this now, for these 2 groups, a couple of case studies. I'm pretty sure you're going to have quite a few aha experiences in this. Let's do the group first, where the cause is not solvable. An electrician fell from the telegraph pole. So, he had the motor conflict, not being able to hold on. He survived the fall with a lot of luck and was severely injured. He resolved his motor conflict and had his first epileptic seizure. This brought him into conventional medicine. They discovered the edema in his brain, and he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. But he had heard about Hummer and refused any therapy. He went into early retirement, but had to come again and again for checkups. So, he avoids the track. He doesn't climb up anywhere. If he would climb up somewhere, he would have his epileptic seizure. He knows that. Once, he ignored Hummer's advice and, being an electrician, quickly installed a satellite dish on the roof for an uncle, before he went on vacation. He climbed up against Hummer's advice. And when he was done, he sat down in the car and got precisely 100 meters, then he lay in the ditch, he had cramped. The crisis in and of itself is always a reason for joy. I was able to resolve a conflict. The problem is just the track, the recurrences, epilepsy when it's chronic. And now, put yourself in the place of a person who has experienced something like that. He survived the fall with a lot of luck. He got a Hummer focus, we can photograph it in the brain. The art now is to have empathy, to put yourself in the place of the person who has experienced something like this. Try it now, and send this person up the 10-meter ladder, or up the tree, or he should walk along the roof. What he has experienced could happen again at any time. By doing this, you are causing this person to have a recurrence. Hummer generally warns against desensitization. What does desensitization actually mean? I, as a therapist, deliberately chase the patient down the track, in the hope that he can overcome it. If he can't overcome it, I, as a therapist, cause the patient to have a recurrence. And Hummer generally warns against desensitization. In the rarest of cases, but it really has to be well thought out, does it make sense to desensitize? And in that case, it's an unsolvable conflict for him. He has to avoid the track. And as I said, he avoids it. If he doesn't avoid it, he has a recurrence. This also happened to an acquaintance of mine, with whom I was climbing in my youth. We have a high wall, which is a climber's paradise. Its difficulty level is 2 to 2.5. You have to climb over a 10-meter gap. But he then went into a rock, with rope and pick and rappelling, so that wasn't mine. He also became an electrician and had to mount lamps on a scaffold in a company hall on a ceiling, and the floor breaks through 1 story. He falls down 1 floor, along with the scaffolding. Then he did the electrical at my house. He was on the balcony where it comes down to 2 floors. It was not possible for him to reach backwards onto the gutter, with his back leaning against the railing. I have no problem with that. But he couldn't do it anymore. And he doesn't have to, or he'll have another recurrence. I don't even know what kind of special program he suffered from that. But he had a recurrence with it, and wiser is to avoid that. Avoidance is the safest thing. And everybody has many issues that we just avoid, and we have every right to do that. Now a case study where I can make clear to you that everyone has his individual perception. It doesn't matter if something is a conflict for you. It doesn't have to be a conflict for me. What is a solution for you must not be a solution for me, and vice versa. It doesn't even have to be accurate. It's enough if the patient is convinced that it is. Everyone has his own perception. Now an example of something that should not be solved anymore. In a study circle, I met a 58-year-old man. He had such a strutting gait. He doesn't bring his legs up, because he has partial paralysis of the leg muscles, a partial paralysis. He tells us, he had his brain CT with Dr. Hummer, but at that time they have found nothing, and that has me at once amazed, that the Hummer does not find a conflict. The patient said, that he had had the paralysis since September 11, 2001. And as I said, motor conflict means not being able to escape. So, September 11, 2001, that is a significant date. Then we were playing billiards, and he tells us that he had the paralysis once before when he was 8 years old, and he still knows exactly what happened. And we always have to look where the first symptom occurred. So, you have to look for the cause there, at 8 years old, a motor conflict. Not being able to lift his legs, not being able to escape. The rest is just the track. He tells us, he was stealing apples with his friends at the local farm, and the farmer catches the boys. All his friends run away, only he is caught by the farmer. The farmer catches him by the collar of his shirt and looks at him closely, right in the face. And he said, he had a face like a devil. He says, he even fainted then. So, he tells the story at age 8. And then the picture of the devil's visage comes to me, September 11th. I ask him, do you know these pictures where these devil visages appear out of these collapsing towers? He says, Helmut, I collect all the articles about September 11th. I have such a thick folder, and I also have these pictures inside an A4 format. I look through this folder at least once a week. So, it immediately raised the hairs on the back of my neck. Because then the real primal conflict is the farmer with 8 years. And September 11th, that's the utterly same situation. You might be able to remember that too, you must have been scared there too. That was also the whole purpose of the 9/11 action. And he said, so I thought at that time, now the war begins. And there he was again confronted with the devil, which he cannot escape. And the paralysis became worse, on September 11, 2001. So, this man got a severe blow to the old wound on 9/11. Then I wanted to know, does he get off the track occasionally? So, what has to happen quite strikingly when I solve a motor conflict? I always have an epileptic seizure during the crisis. He says, he hasn't had a seizure all his life. But if he never had a seizure, he must have been partially paralyzed throughout. Then he could never have been fast when running. He says he wasn't, he never played soccer, because he couldn't get his legs up. So then I played Sorcerer's Apprentice. I said to him, hey, I think I know what we have to do. You have to get rid of the farmer. It's been 50 years since the story. He's certainly been lying in the cemetery for a long time. Now you bring him 5 pounds of apples to the grave, ask him for forgiveness, and then you swear that you will never steal apples again. That'll get rid of the farmer. And then you throw away this stupid folder with 9/11. Please, don't believe that planes flew into the towers. I'm going to try to show you something. This is a sequence, you have seen this film sequence for sure hundreds of times. Now watch the left wing of the plane. Do you see the same thing I see? The wing flies by behind this house, the airplane was manipulated into it. The airplane never really existed. That's the kind of society we live in, and everybody plays along. So, I advised him to throw away this stupid folder. And the following day I thought, that when he came down from the track, he would have a violent epileptic seizure. And in my mind, I heard Hummer scolding me, Helmut, what have you done there again? So, I called the patient and he told me, that he had a dream that night. In the dream, he was in the meadow where it happened with the farmer. And in the meadow, there was a beautiful little chapel. And next to it was the entrance to hell. He knew, that if he went there in his dream, he would be with the devil. And this is also a very typical indication, that the farmer was the conflict at that time. An unresolved conflict always returns in dreams. Often a little bit encoded, but the feeling which one has thereby, points precisely there. This is also typical for war veterans, who keep dreaming the horror from the war, and then have Parkinson's. Anyway, I admonished him emphatically not to drive the car at all. The epileptic seizure is coming, as surely as childbirth during pregnancy. At some point, it will come. And he should also let his wife know, not that she panics and calls the ambulance. Then he will come to the hospital with sirens wailing. Brain tumor and so on. When he begins to tremble, he must call me. Trembling is a sign of resolution. The paralysis is active, and when you tremble, that is the healing phase. In the crisis, you have an epileptic seizure. And at the end of the healing, the symptom is gone. I don't hear from him for half a year. Then he revisited my study group, and he still walks around strutting like that. I ask him, did you take the apples to the grave? He says no. I ask him, did you throw away the folder? Says he, Helmut, I'm interested in this subject. And standing next to him was a friend who knows him well, and overhears what this patient is about. Then his friend says, and besides, you're also showing everyone this barcode, this 666. I hope I'm not scaring you too much. You see the first double bar, the middle one, and the last one. The cash register reads this double bar as 6. And there we have a 6, and a second, and a third double bar. And his friend continues. When he goes shopping, he spreads the products on the kitchen table, and with a felt pen he energetically deletes every single barcode on every product. That told his friend, and everyone who does not know it yet, you show the German identity card. With the horned Baphomet on it, yes, that's the big boss of Germany. And then it drops like scales from my eyes. He carries the devil in his wallet, and he is surrounded by him everywhere. That's why he only has the active symptoms of this special program motor conflict, the paralysis. That's why he never convulses. That's why he never trembles. Because in principle, he sits as if hypnotized, like a mouse in front of a snake, and cannot move. 2 years later, he died of a stroke. What I had overlooked was the conflict load of 50 years, from 8 to 58. You always have to consider the brain as well. Brain edema occurs during healing, and with 50 years of conflict load, this can lead to brain overpressure. I had not considered that at all. And that will also be the reason why Hummer told him that he doesn't see anything. Because if he finds the conflict together with the patient, and the patient realizes that for me today, this is meaningless, then he inevitably solves the conflict and comes into healing, which he cannot survive. In such a case, one must not find the conflict and search for it with the patient. 50 years later, there is a high probability that the conflict is irrelevant. In such a case, one should not look for it at all. Therefore, I am not a therapist. You can believe me, I know much too little to be a therapist. And those who call themselves a therapist, beware. I would not run to anyone. So, and now maybe this is about the reality. For him, the devil existed. He was strictly esoteric, he was already hovering in the 7th dimension, he said. He was already much further than Hummer and was no longer very cooperative. He smoked pot to no end, and without 2 liters of wine, he did not go to bed. And with brain edema, all this is not really ideal. For him, Jesus and the devil were reality. That is why it became a conflict with him. As he said, I thought the war was beginning. I have a different reality. I have different conflicts, and so do you. It doesn't really make life easier, but it makes it human. We are all different. But still, these special programs always follow the same pattern. That can be learned to get to the conflict, to the cause. So in this case, the cause was not solvable. Because it was reality for him. I can't say for sure now whether his brain stroke was related to it or not. But as I said, he believes it. The second case is where the cause is not solvable. This patient has a diagnosis of sarcoidosis of the lung. That is, a connective tissue inflammation of the lung in conventional medicine. But it has nothing to do with pneumonia. These people eventually end up with the oxygen bottle, and have only 60% lung capacity, continuously decreasing. And this patient was with Dr. Hummer. He sees in the brain CT, he has a recurrent fear of death. So pulmonary nodule, cell proliferation, tuberculous degradation, scarring. In, out, says the 30-year-old, a fear of death I'm supposed to have experienced, but I would already know that or? And he searched for 14 days for his fear of death experience, and found it. He was a student and always rode his bicycle from the dormitory to the university. One day, he is driving towards a red traffic light for bicycles and sees that the traffic light for cross traffic is also just turning red. He goes through his red light, and in the middle of the street he realizes that a car is approaching out of the corner of his eye. The car also wanted to cross the intersection quickly at red. And he thinks to himself, now it's over. I no longer reach the other side of the road. Nothing happened at all, the car just managed to stop. A lot happened to him. A shock happened. Fear of death with the track cycling. Whenever he sat on the bike, the lungs had cell growth, he put the bike down, he came into healing. Tuberculous degradation, in out, about the track of bicycling. Dr. Hummer advised him for the first time, to bypass this intersection. Maybe only this intersection is the track. So, he drove from this day a real detour, never again over this intersection. Then his studies were soon over, and he moved in with his parents. Riding a bike had never really excited him, so he let go of riding a bike altogether. A year later the doctors said, If they didn't know the initial diagnosis, they wouldn't come up with it on their own now. Lung efficiency is back to 90%. 100% is not possible, due to the many recurrences. In the case of glands and glandular-like tissue, thyroid, the lungs, the mammary glands, in the yellow and yellow-orange group, we have the phenomenon that there is a little less tissue left at the end of healing than initially present. So in the conflict active phase, 1,000 cells are built up. In the healing phase, 1,100 are broken down again. I have 100 cells less. In the lungs, in the breast, in the thyroid gland. This is not noticeable. But if I run this program hundreds of times, thousands of times, each time I have 100 cells less, then the initial tissue melts away. And in the lungs, this leads to sarcoidosis. In the thyroid to hypofunction, in the breast to sagging breasts. The tissue that once it's gone stays gone, and does not come back. But he has 90% lung capacity again. And the exciting thing was that he is a smoker, and he has never stopped smoking. While smoking, it got worse and worse. And while smoking, it also got better and better again. So this is not related to smoking. Put yourself in such a person's shoes and let's say, he's biking down the street 10 years later. And suddenly a car bolts out of a cross street, he's got a full recurrence. A track like that can last a lifetime. Until now, we did not know what the cause of sarcoidosis was. There are 100 million different cases. We didn't know why he suffers from it chronically. Now we know it, track cycling. And if he avoids cycling he will get well. It costs nothing and has no side effects. And you earn nothing from him, what a joke. Indeed, the system can't tolerate that. Yes, it can't. We don't really need the medical system at all, except for emergency medicine. But the rest can be thrown on the garbage heap of history with a clear conscience. It's just bragging, arrogance, and all at our expense. A seminar participant said to me, "Helmut, here in Austria you have such good air, he doesn't need oxygen." That's why he spent a month hiking in the mountains in Salzburg. But as soon as he is back home in Germany, he needs his oxygen. A patient with an oxygen bottle. I ask him if he had once suffered a mortal fear? And he spontaneously says that he remembers it very well. A pileup on the highway. He crashed into the wrecks and behind him it also does, buff, 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 and the shreds fly everywhere. He and his wife get trapped in the wreck. It's not until an hour later that the emergency services arrive, and they say at first glance the two are dead too. And they move on. Then they free themselves. Then the mechanism is also evident. When he is in Austria for mountain hiking, he doesn't drive a car, and there it gets better and better. When he is at home, he drives a car, and it gets worse and worse. Because he doesn't avoid the track. And he has his house in the green, he has to go by car to get rolls, he has a hard time avoiding the track. And there you can see, it's not so easy to change life. He would have to move to the city, where he doesn't need a car, because he has the infrastructure. But that is not considered therapy. Swallowing tablets is considered therapy. Chemo and radiation and radical surgery, that is considered therapy. But it is not causal. Acting causally often means that I have to change my life. Which is not so easy. But that is not considered therapy. That is simply a rethinking process that will take until the GHK has arrived in the heads of the people, and that is exactly my goal. I am not a therapist. My target audience is not the patient. But my target audience is the interested person. That you learn to understand it, in you rests my hope. That you will help Germanische Heilkunde to become legal. This must be our goal. Only then can we practice it everywhere. Only then can doctors practice it. Only then can we train therapists. The therapist must be trained on the patient. So, and now there is the phenomenon that you can transform down a conflict, that you cannot solve by talking about it again and again. So, the partner, so to speak my wife, tells me a sentence. And that becomes a conflict for me. So that I always have to tell each of my friends, imagine what my wife has said to me. Until they wave me off at some point and say, you've already told me that 5 times. That's how you get the pressure out of the conflict, and that's how I can transform it down. I can't definitely solve it, because the partner could repeat this sentence at any time. But if it was a trifle, then I can transform the conflict down. But if it is not a trifle, and I talk about it repeatedly, then I keep the conflict alive, which is also wrong. In that case, you should not talk about it, avoid the track. Such a trifle happened to me once. I was driving at night on a 2-lane highway, in the first lane. About 130 km per hour, I notice in the rearview mirror, I'm overtaken. They were dangerously close to me. Suddenly, they cut crosswise in front of me and slithered across the highway. Now I had them in front of me. He slithers in front of me up the embankment, clears the bushes, and his light suddenly went off. Now I couldn't see him anymore, and I had him somewhere to my right. Then I accelerated to get out of his range. But then I stopped and ran back. From out of the darkness came two young lads. Nothing happened to them. But their car was a total loss. After 1 hour, the police were there, and I drove on. They did not touch me. The next morning, I had a feeling on the inside of my index finger, as if I had implanted an iron chip, but I couldn't see anything. It itched so much. 2 or 3 days later, I had, at the same spot, a tiny eczema. No eczema without separation conflict. I was highly acute, isolative, and caught on the wrong foot. And I still had the separation conflict in my fresh memory. That was just a few days ago, a near miss. I wanted to be separated. Don't get too close to me. My car was only 6 months old, and you know the boy is proud of his toys. As I said, I knew my conflict, but now the eczema got bigger and bigger. It went almost around half the finger, and it really hurts. Eczema is healing, and if healing does not disappear, then it is hanging healing, then there must be a track over which I always suffer a relapse. The track points towards the conflict, and why precisely in this place. If someone had asked me back then, "Helmet, how do you typically steer your car?" I would have said for sure, with both hands, but my body says, no, typically you just hook in with one index finger. So, I hook into the steering wheel, press cruise control, and then I cruise the hundreds of miles to my destination. And here, at this point on the index finger is the most contact to the steering wheel, so that's where it started. There is also this contact eczema. Some people are allergic to rubber, with eczema. So, these people have suffered a separation conflict with the track rubber. That was in their mind at the time. So, I thought that maybe I was allergic to the plastic of this steering wheel, that was stored in my mind. My car was a Voyager. I had never owned such a huge vehicle with a plastic steering wheel. The plastic steering wheel, that always bothered me a little bit. And smart as I was, I went to the garage where I bought the car. I gave them my finger and asked if they process allergens in their plastics. I wanted a wooden steering wheel, quasi on the guarantee. Unfortunately, they definitely denied that, and I didn't want to push it to the extreme, so I got myself gloves. I wouldn't touch the steering wheel. But suddenly, eczema exploded. Then I had it on my left hand too. But only where I hold the steering wheel. Nowhere else. When these bubbles burst, the secretion flowed out. Or if I had made a fist, then this hard surface broke, and that hurt. But now I didn't touch the steering wheel at all. I wore these gloves, and it got worse and worse. Then the plastic can't be the track. I must have caught another track. Of course, I immediately recalled this almost accident, and I still remember it today. When they skidded in front of me, I wrestled with myself. Should I make an emergency stop? Then the load drops on my head, and I didn't make an emergency stop. I braked behind them. I thought or pondered, maybe that was my problem. So I got myself a backboard for the car. On side roads, I did test braking, and there everything banged forward. Through this experience, it arrived at the back of my mind. I am safe in this cage, but eczema did not disappear. Then I know a case, where the position of the arms is a track. When this woman works at the kitchen table or when she dances, she gets on the track. So I thought, I have to change the position on the steering wheel. So, I got a knob for the steering wheel, and I steered the car like a tractor. That is also very practical. I have the knob with the camper, and with my left hand, I didn't touch the steering wheel at all. I have automatic transmission. But the eczema did not disappear, not even on the left hand, although I no longer touched the steering wheel at all with my left hand, and only steered using the knob. Often I was on the road for 3 weeks at a time. Back home, 3 weeks on the road again. At home, I could watch the eczema heal, but as soon as I started driving again, it came back. Then I suspected that I was allergic to the car. It also smelled new. So I thought, I must drive once with my wife's old Audi 100 on a round trip through Germany. Without automatic transmission, without auxiliary heating, without air conditioning, and without Navi. Even without my Bose high-end music speakers. So I can tell you for sure, changing life, that's the hardest thing. I took the old Audi for a drive through Germany. On the way home I realized, the eczema was not resolving. And then I knew the track. It was not the steering wheel, It was not the car, my track was the driving itself. If I drove a car, no matter which one, the symptom would come. If I didn't drive a car, it disappeared. With this realization, I was devastated. At that time, I drove 80,000 kilometers a year. And I can't just switch to cab or to train. I have the equipment to lug around, and I give seminars on healing, and I can't even shake someone's hand. But all of a sudden, it healed. Within a few days, it disappeared entirely. This program went on for several months. And then what happened? By realizing, driving the car it is, I was able to transform it down by becoming conscious, bringing it out of the subconscious and into the conscious. And why? Because I'm an avid driver. I learned to drive when I was 12 years old. At 16, I was driving in traffic, without a license. At 17, I had registered my VW Beetle without a driver's license. So, me and an allergy to driving, I don't want that. I like to drive a car, and I like to drive big cars. So, I was able to transform that down. Let's say, this almost accident had happened to my sister-in-law Veronica, and she hates driving. My brother-in-law is allowed to drive a maximum of 100 km per hour, and if he has to react in traffic, she has a hysterical fit. So, she couldn't possibly have transformed that down. If this near accident had happened to Michael Schumacher, the 5-time Formula One world champion, in his better days, he might not even have had a conflict. He would have had a total overview of every fraction of a second, and would have been amused at how it hurled them over the embankment. I could not finally resolve my conflict, because a traffic accident can actually happen again at any time. When I'm on the road, to this day I feel as if I've burned my fingers. In the active phase, the skin makes ulcers, it is dry, it is rough, and paralyzed. The active phase is numb. The healing hurts, because under inflammation and swelling, it is repaired again. And thereby you have these symptomatic eczemas or ulcers or neurodermatitis. I can't solve the conflict, I just transformed it down. That means the skin doesn't ulcerate anymore, but I still have the pain. So, I am always on the track again. If I come away from the track again, then I have the pain. I could not finally solve this conflict. I have only transformed it down. That's how individual we are. What becomes a conflict for you doesn't have to become a conflict for me. And what is a solution for you, doesn't have to be a solution for me. But every eczema has a conflict of separation. And if it doesn't disappear, there has to be a track. You have to find that out, which can often be a detective feat. But there is no way around it. And it's also thieving fun. Especially when you find the conflict in the track, and when then the symptoms disappear. That is an experience. If you haven't experienced it yourself, you can't even describe it. It's a gain in quality of life. You're happy like a child. How it can come to a conflict and tracks, I was a witness myself. A young couple visited us, they became attentive about the book, The Lucrative Lies of Science. The author dedicated this book to Dr. Hummer in the Pilhar family. And this couple visited us quite spontaneously. He wanted to accompany me on a lecture tour. So, I took him with me once. We were on the road together for a week. He is left-handed and has had a thickening on the right testicle, since he was 7 years old. And often he had a sharp pain from the testicle to the brain. This is how he described it. He tried to convince me that it must have been a lost conflict about his father, that testicle is a lost conflict. At that time, he thought his father had died in an accident. But you can chop that off right away. He is left-handed, his right testicle is the mother-child testicle. He did not have children at 7, so only the mother comes into question, but not the father. So with the mother, you have to look. But to the mother, he could not think of anything. Therefore, possibly about an animal that he loves like a child, and if that dies or is injured, the child can react with testicular cancer. But he never had animals, and he couldn't think of anything about the mother. And he had with him the Golden Book of Dr. Hummer, in which the first case with a testicular cyst is described with the following words. He has a testicle like an ostrich egg. That was his panic, he was a hypochondriac. He was always afraid he would get a testicle like that was a terrible idea for him. We were on the road together for a week, and we certainly tried to find the conflict every day, and we didn't find it. So he listened to my introductory lecture, and he took the entire seminar. And on the way back from Leipzig to Salzburg, he really wanted to replace me driving. But I have this principle, you don't borrow cars and women. That was our luck. Fortunately, I didn't let him drive. He recalls his conflict in the middle of the highway. while lying in bed at 7, and he hears the parents talking. The mother says to the father, "I'm going to kill myself." It was about the sister, who is severely handicapped. And the mother ran from Pontius to Pilate, and nobody could help her. Completely overwhelmed, she says to her husband, "I'm going to kill myself." The boy has heard this. He sits next to me in the passenger seat, tells his conflict, and was shocked that he experienced something like that. And the next moment he gets an epileptic seizure. But so very strange. Put his butt into the seat, head back into the backrest, forward into the dashboard, back into the backrest. Arms still, legs still, only with the pelvic muscles, back and forth. I put my hand on his shoulder and brake the car. It took a quarter of an hour until he was responsive again, and he was well trained. 22 years old, and had never had an epileptic seizure. When we arrived at the hotel in Salzburg, he went straight to bed. The following day, he told me he had peed 5 times during the night, the peeing phase. After that, I heard nothing from him for years. Then I was told through third parties that I don't hear from him because whenever he sees Pilhar, he has an epileptic seizure. So what happened there? He was panicked to get such a testicular cyst, and he had already not believed that such a loss should have happened to him. And suddenly, he finds this highly acute conflict, the cause with himself. Isolative and caught on the wrong foot. And he was shocked. He wanted to protect his testicle, that's why the pelvic muscles. Not the arms, not the legs, and protect from the Pilhar, because by the story with the Pilhar, he can get the testicular cyst. That's why the Pilhar was in his head, and the track Pilhar now belongs to these motor conflicts. And the conflict is not resolved until it can't happen anymore, or until he can laugh about it. But as long as he can't laugh about it, this early warning system remains. And so he avoids me. I can live with this. So, and now there is the phenomenon that an allergy becomes more and more. Now you are also allergic to this or that. And this also has a simple mechanism. The baby is lying in the crib, and the cat unintentionally jumps into the child's face. The child suffers a scare-fright conflict with asthma, highly acute, isolative and caught on the wrong foot, with the track cat hair. From now on, the child reacts asthmatically to cat hair. Asthma is a crisis, but this always comes afterward. Then one day, the child is in a room with a dog, and the child is excited, Boa, the dog. The child is totally excited about the dog. The child's brain is now entirely occupied with the dog, and suddenly a cat runs around the corner. Through the cat, the Hummer focus instantly occurs and stores the dog's hair as well. Now the child reacts asthmatically to cat and dog. And sometimes, the child is in a stable with a horse, and the child, Boa, a horse, has only the horse in the head, and there runs a dog around the corner. He gets the Hummer focus through the dog, which stores horsehair and reacts immediately against the cat, dog and horse allergic, with asthma. Although the horse was programmed only 5 years later, this horse track points to the conflict with the cat, from 5 years ago. Here we speak of the extension track. And now a beautiful case, with an extension track from Hummer, and also the wise advice for the biological solution, that is the royal art in Germanische Heilkunde. A young woman of 21 years, right-handed, only daughter still living with her parents, has had epilepsy since she was 7 years old, with so-called grade seizures, that is on the whole body. At first, she had a major seizure every few weeks for 3 years. So from age 14, 3 years until 17, despite medication. After that, no seizures for 3 years, until 20. For a year, she has had a gradual seizure every 2 to 3 weeks. The young woman graduated from high school and works at a bank. Hummer asks, "What happened to you about age 7? The parents, "Nothing, we have already thought about this a lot." Hummer, "Nothing happened at all." Surely, that's not possible. Do the seizures always start in the same way? The father, "Yes, she always turns her eyes to the left at the beginning of the seizure." Hummer, "Oh, interesting. So, always as right-handed to the side of the mother. So, she couldn't continue to follow the mother with her eyes to the left. What happened to the mother?" The father, "Is it possible to deduce that exactly? Could it also be related to the fact that we parents, both 50, had a marital crisis from time to time?" Hummer, "You don't get epilepsy from having a marital crisis now and then, it's possible if it was really bad once." Did the mother run away once? The mother, "Yes, once it was really bad. I went away for 2 weeks. And after I returned, our daughter had her first epileptic seizure, before she was 7 years old. So, she was away for 2 weeks. The daughter had built up 2 weeks of conflict load. Then the mother came back. 1 week later, the daughter had her first epileptic seizure. You always have to look where it started. So, before the age of 7. The crisis is in and of itself a reason for joy. I was able to resolve a conflict. The mother was back home. That was the solution, after all. The problem now is the track. However, once you get a hold of a corner of differential diagnosis, the rest is mostly just routine. The father, what do you mean by routine? Hummer, well, it doesn't take much now to imagine that after the mother returned, the marital quarrel went on. The father, yes, that's right. Hummer, and the girl was always shaking, oh God, I hope it doesn't escalate again, and the mother runs away again. And the father, and what about the medication? Hummer, the so-called anti-epileptics prevent the healing phase from setting in. But sometimes it sets in despite the medication, with the epileptic seizure in the middle of that healing phase. The mother, but after the first 3 years, our daughter had no seizures for 3 years. Hummer, again, it takes little imagination to conceive that the girl lived in constant well-founded fear of a major escalation, that her mother would move out again. From then on, the marital skirmish seems to have been at a lower level, so there was no reasonable suspicion for her daughter that the mother might move out again. The mother, doctor, when I think about it carefully, that was really the case. Hummer, you can deduce all that criminally. The mother, and why has she been having grand mal seizures again for a year now, despite medication? Even if she drank alcohol? Hummer, since when has she been drinking alcohol? Not that much, but on weekends a good few glasses for a year now. Hummer, the marital disputes seem to have become more heated again, since a year ago. The daughter lives at home. The father, yes, that's right, the marital disputes have become more violent again since a year ago. My wife has also threatened to move out again several times. But what about the alcohol? Hummer, this is the famous extension track. If the daughter has experienced a more violent marital dispute under alcohol, the alcohol can act as an independent track. From then on, alcohol always reminds her of her parents' marital strife. Alcohol consumption itself can then lead to relapse with subsequent epileptic crisis in the healing phase. The father, and what can we do? Hummer, they should both exert their autotherapeutic imagination. For example, bury the marital hatchet for good and/or get a husband for the pretty daughter, so that she can build her own nest and have children. Then she won't need to work at the crooked bank anymore, but can be an honest mother. And then whether the parents she loves both live together or live apart is no longer so important. I promise you, then your daughter will never have another seizure. The father, doctor, that makes sense to me. But do you think it's that simple? Hummer, if you go to the realization, you will find that it is only simple in principle. Otherwise, you have a lot of school work to do now, you and your wife, consort. So what is the solution? One possibility would be to bury the hatchet. Yes, then the daughter will no longer come on the track, and there will be no epileptic seizures. The second solution possibility, there are always several possibilities for a conflict. The best solution would be for her to start her own family. Because then something very decisive happens in her life. A new stage of life begins, and she can shift the focus of her life away from her parents to her own family. And whether or not her parents get in each other's hair, she doesn't give a damn, because now it's all about her child and her own family. And now you're trying to help a 21-year-old who comes straight from assisted thinking. You know assisted thinking? You know, the assisted living. And the assisted thinking, that is the mass media, which pretended to make her career in the bank. Now try to explain to this 21-year-old woman that the bank is nonsense and that it would be much wiser to start her own family and have children. The 21-year-old will tell you that you're crazy. I want to be independent, I want to experience something. I'm still way too young. And that is civilization junk. Look out into this society. Today, 30-year-olds are still walking around without having had a child. Would you see a doe in nature which is 30 years old and still had no young? There you would ask yourselves justifiably the question, something is not right with that doe. This is not normal. And what is normal for us, not to have children, that is biological nonsense. That is really nonsense. What would be normal? Logically, early and many children. But that is considered antisocial in our society. It prevents me from developing. What development? A career in the bank? And what is the normal path of such a patient? She remains in the bank, she remains epileptic. She can't drive and has to take medication. I mean, What's smarter now? The biological solution with a child, or this bullshit? Hummer calls this, as I said, civilization junk. And many have a problem with that too. In nature, as I said, the doe would be pregnant with the first ovulation. And with the second ovulation again, and with the third again. In nature, the therapy is virtually pre-programmed. She becomes healthy at the earliest at the next ovulation. But we must first learn again to understand our biology, what is good for us and what is not good for us. And we are, as I said, wholly denatured, and we have been dumbed down. And that is not an easy subject. Therefore, Hummer is not only making trouble with medicine. He is also making trouble with religion, he is making trouble everywhere. He's also ticking off society. This case is still wonderful as well. I am not reading it off, but recounting it from memory. This is actually a teaching example. A mother has many, many children and stress. With many children, you have a lot of stress. One cow makes moo, many cows make trouble. Then, once there was the situation, on the one hand, she should be at home with one of the children to do the homework. But on the other hand, she should just quickly bring a small child to a birthday party. But the child did not want to stay there without the mother. And now the mother had to stay at the children's birthday party. 2 hours, until the child also wanted to stay there alone. Only then could she go home and do the homework with her other child. And since then, she has reacted chronically with the bladder in similar situations. She called it being torn. Someone wants something and someone else wants something else, at the same time. And she reacts to that with the bladder. So she thought about it. I used to have situations like that, and I didn't react with the bladder. If I have such a situation now, I chronically react with the bladder. The difference. Before, it was a psychological problem. The conflict, highly acute, isolative, and caught on the wrong foot, became a biological conflict. From psychological problems to biological conflicts. Now the tracks are working. That's also the difference between a psychological problem. What doesn't make us sick? That's where psychosomatics is wrong. Stress makes us ill, is not true at all, but it is being caught on the wrong foot that makes you sick. Now the same event suddenly becomes a recurrence, because I have an allergic reaction to it. This is actually a classic example to illustrate this mechanism nicely. Now we come to the second group, where the cause is already without an object, one has just not realized it yet. There it is enough to find it once. I know myself then, I know myself now, so I know the difference. Then the tracks dissolve instantly. How such a thing can happen? Let's assume that the parents allow themselves a joke, leave the 2-year-old John behind in the flowering meadow, and hide in the bushes. John suffers a moment of shock, highly acute, isolative, on the wrong foot. The mom is gone, the dad is gone, a literal visual separation with the conjunctiva, and with the nasal mucosa, that can't smell the parents. When my dog is looking for me, the Rottweiler, she follows her nose. Where is my master? So, she cannot smell, and partner and mother-child side, with the track, with grasses. From now on, the boy reacts allergically to grasses, with conjunctivitis and rhinitis on both sides. And let's assume that John is now 10 years old, and we point it out to him, so it started at the age of 2. The 10-year-old will say, that's all good and well, but I'm still afraid when mom and dad are away. So for the 10-year-old, this conflict is not resolved, and the allergy remains, although he knows it, the allergy remains. Let's assume that John is now 30 years old, and we point out to him, you started it at the age of 2. Then the 30-year-old will say, that's right, and today I'm very happy when I don't see or hear anything from dad and mom. And with that, the allergy is gone. He knows him then, he knows him now, and that's how he knows the difference. Back then, it was a disaster. Today he is happy to see and hear nothing from his parents. And the conflict is solved. The tracks dissolve, and the allergy disappears. That's the mechanism, for example. It's always the same, John. But by the time he's 30, he's already cut the cord. I always give my seminars from Saturday to Thursday, 6 days in a row. About as intense as this video tutorial. It's really hard work, but I enjoy it, and so do the participants. One 50-year-old seminar participant realizes on the first day, Saturday, what the conflict and tracks are to her bread and dairy intolerance, which she has had since she was 20 years old. She reacts with stomach and duodenal ulcers, and that hurts in the active phase. So, if she eats bread or milk, she has a recurrence and immediate pain. She has been avoiding any bread product and any dairy product for 30 years. The conflict was in her 20s. She was in the kitchen preparing a loaf of bread, a glass of milk, and was dressed a bit coquettishly, short skirt, stockings, high heels. Her father enters the kitchen, sees his 20-year-old daughter dressed like a hooker and beats her up, resulting in a broken nose. That was her territorial anger conflict. That's in the territory. The brain relay controls the small curator of the stomach and duodenum, the first section. With the track bread and milk. From now on, every time she ate bread or milk, bang, she was active. Beep beep attention. That's when you got beat up. She suffered a relapse with this program. The biological sense of that program is that the bread and milk passes better biologically. We have to understand programs from the history of development to understand their meaning. But she also realized the father is now 80 and lives hundreds of miles away. And this 80-year-old man will certainly not beat up his 50-year-old daughter today just because she dressed in a certain way. So what happened back then can't happen today at all. She tries so successively this bread product and also the dairy products. And on Wednesday, she tells her story in front of the audience. She tells, yesterday she ate such a bowl of ice cream, because she had so much appetite for ice cream for years, for ice cream that she could never eat. And the allergy is gone. She can eat everything again. And that costs nothing. This therapy costs nothing, the brain does it, the organism does it, the body, it's free. What should the therapist charge for it now? That's also a problem. I mean, often you don't find the conflict, and you struggle with it for hours and days and weeks, and you don't find the conflict. And sometimes it's obvious, and you get better. She was sick for 30 years, and suddenly she gets well. What should the therapist charge now? An hourly rate? Or what should I charge? That's a little difficult, too. An example of repression. Often one does not repress the entire event, but only a part, a terrible part. By the way, these conflicts hurt. And by repressing, we can transform these conflicts down, making them livable. But we can't remember them, because they've been buried. Nevertheless, the tracks work, and the recurrences come via the tracks. First, you have to dig it up from the subconscious. This 40-year-old had a hay allergy, hay fever. He said he knows how it started. When he was 5 years old, he spent half an afternoon rolling down the meadow with his 7-year-old sister, and at one point, he got up, and his face was completely swollen. And since then, he has had this allergy. He says he knows how it started. He knows nothing will change about his allergy, and he doesn't know where to start now. Until a study circle leader told him, "Your sister must have pushed you." Since then, the allergy has gone away. He has a sister, whom he adores. She wouldn't do something like that. The guy repressed that. And it must have come to a conflict. First of all, why does he get up, and his face is all swollen? Something must have happened. And secondly, it came to a track, to an allergy. Without conflict, there is no allergy. And that the sister pushed him, the guy suppressed that. The sister was older by 2 years then, and the sister is older by 2 years now. She was probably stronger than him then, so that he couldn't resolve that then. But today, she no longer pushes him. What happened then in childhood can no longer happen today, and the allergy is gone. I don't want to know how many people suffer unnecessarily. They would only need to find their way to their conflict, and it would all dissolve into nothing. At a seminar, a dentist stood up and told his apple allergy. He has a track on his favorite apples, Granny Smiths, and when he bites into them, his larynx swells or spasms, so that he can't breathe. Yes, that is life-threatening. And he sits at the computer and reads the AFE story, I'll tell it right after, and he thinks to himself, it's just like me with my apple allergy. This allergy started with a quarrel with his ex-wife. It says that the track is part of the conflict. And since then, he can no longer eat the apples. But the ex-wife is already gone, what happened then can't happen now. So, he's sitting at the computer thinking, does that mean I don't have an allergy now? I can now go down to the store and buy an apple, and bite into it? And I don't have an allergy? He gets up from the computer, goes down to the store. Thinks, should I buy a 10-pound bag right away or? To be on the safe side, he buys just one apple. Bites into it and no longer has an allergy, because it can no longer happen. And this is the story he read. A 55-year-old woman has had AFE since she was 5 years old. AFE are blisters in the mucous membrane of the mouth, and hurt terribly. And for the last 30 years, she has known it's a nut allergy and has been on a strict food separation diet ever since, just no nuts. Then she describes a doctor visit. The doctor gives her medicine. And, to the doctor, "Doctor, I already know this medicine. I want to get rid of my aphae." Says the doctor, "Look, I'll show you something." The doctor shows her his aphae and says, "That's genetic, she'll have to live with that." So then she comes to Hummer, and we can translate the organ level. She hears, the conflict for aphae is, "I want to spit something out." Yes, that is the squamous epithelium of the oral mucosa, what we touch with the tongue. And the biological sense is to ulcerate it, so that I can spit it out better. That's where the active phase hurts, the hole in the oral mucosa. In the healing, the blister comes, which then hurts less. Only the crisis hurts again. And so, she must have suffered a conflict at 5, wanted to spit something out, and in the process, her brain stored nuts. What was that? That also lasted about 14 days. And one morning, half asleep, half awake, she remembers the conflict. Shortly after the war, she was with her sister, 2 little girls stealing nuts from the neighbor. The neighbor was an old witch, who watched everything from behind the curtain. And when the children threw the nutshells over the fence, she started to scold them. Now, that was embarrassing to the mother, and now the mom came and beat the girl's butt. That was the conflict with the girl, and every time she ate nuts, her brain remembers, "Spit that out, you got beat up, the bad back then, spit out." Now she knew the conflict and the track, but what to do? She got some nuts and stood in front of the mirror at home, with the nuts in her hand, and thought, "If I eat the nut now, the neighbor can't scold me anymore, she's at the cemetery. And my 80-year-old mother will no longer beat me up, because of the nuts." She eats the nut, gets another small blister, the cure, and since then not again, because it can't happen again. Sure, genetically conditioned. Now, make something of this statement. It is genetically conditioned. You can smoke all that in the pipe. Such bullshit. It's kind of like original sin, such bullshit. Why is that baby's original sin? What's that all about? Go to the grizzly and tell him he is an original sinner, you must be redeemed. Yes? From what? Does the grizzly say, "Come here, I'll redeem you"? Bullshit, I'm sorry, but it's time we do a reformation. Now an example with multiple tracks. A 40-year-old woman has had migraine attacks since she was 7 years old. She describes, the pain extends down into her jawbone. She feels like her teeth are getting loose. Her parents took her from Pontius to Pilate when she was a child, and no one could help. And then when she was older, she tried to manage it herself, she changed her diet, according to Bruckner. But the migraine remained. Then they said, it was the sleeping place. She got the most expensive mattresses, and the migraines remained the same. Then she was married and blamed the migraine on a TV transmitter nearby. Because of the TV transmitter and migraine, they got a new apartment and moved, the migraine moved with them. It was probably not the cause. And then she comes to Hummer and hears that the migraine is the crisis of a frontal fear. A danger that rushes at us from the front, like an express train that rushes at me. So, she must have suffered a frontal fear at the age of 7. Or rather, she must have solved it. She could not deal with this at all. Then she tried to put the cart before the horse. She thought, when do I get the migraine? She always got the migraine with her period, but also when she ate strawberries. So she thought, what does the period have in common with strawberries? At some point, she came up with the color red. Then she studied, what does the color red mean to me? Suddenly she comes to it, that she owns with her 40 years no single red piece of clothing, no red trousers, no red skirt, no red blouse. Simply nothing red. And with red in clothes, she found her conflict. She was the youngest of 4 girls. And as the youngest, she always had to wear out the older one's clothes. And at 7, she got her first new piece of clothing, a red coat. She goes with it at the children's playground, and gets dirty right on the first day. Now the child was afraid of the mother, who will scold her. So, she thought, if I wait until it's completely dark, then maybe mom won't see it. The child waits until 11 p.m. The mother at home, vexing, where is the child? The girl comes home whistling. The mother did not ask any questions at all. She went after the child and beat the child. The girl drops to the ground bleeding, the mother continues to beat the child mindlessly. The sister stands next to her and screams, "Mother, stop it. She's already bleeding like a pig." The frontal fear, the beating mother, crashing down on her, blood red as the track, the red coat. When she found out that it was her own mother, at first she couldn't talk to her mother for half a year. Only again when she had put herself in her situation. The effect was, the migraine was reduced by half, but not gone. Then one day at work again, such a migraine. She just wanted to go home and was having a meeting with the boss. Finally, the meeting was over. She walks out the door, and the boss calls out a sentence after her. Suddenly the migraine was gone. She thinks about it, it usually takes me 3 days. That must have been the boss's sentence, your opinion was very important to me now, he called after her. That was another track that led to the mother. The mother didn't ask, child, where have you been for so long? Did you fall? Did you get beaten up? What happened? She just beat on her. So, whenever she felt left out, if you didn't ask for her opinion, she subsequently reacted with migraine. Feelings can also become a track. The effect, the migraine again reduced by half. Then one day at an inn, she witnesses the innkeeper yelling down an employee. And she felt that this was unjust and humiliating. This patient is only a small person, but she stood up in front of the innkeeper in her full height, and gave him a piece of her mind for once. And again such a migraine had. The humiliation, the injustice. That was all in her head at that time, when she had suffered the frontal fear with her mother. She had all in all 4 or 5 tracks in place. It took her a whole year to find all the tracks. And with the realization, oh that was there at the time, she was able to dissolve that. Resolve it how? Because what happened then can no longer happen today. At the age of 40, she can come home after 11 p.m., and no beating mother is waiting. She can wash her clothes herself. Buy them herself, no beating mother is waiting, it can't happen anymore. Today she is migraine-free. And the crazy thing about the story, she herself could not remember this incident at all, had it not been for her sister. The sister is also just as enthusiastic about Germanische Heilkunde, and together they have found out everything over a year. She had utterly repressed it, and this repression usually has a solid reason. She also told me this reason, and she said, Helmut, at that time I thought my mother might want to kill me. How could a 7-year-old child live with the fact that her mother might want to beat her to death? The child repressed that. But the tracks still work the recurrences. So, even if you don't get to your conflict right away, you can assume for once that that's how it works. And that's why it's never wrong to keep a symptom diary, even for the child. The milk allergy of a daughter of a study circle leader. When the child drinks milk, the child blossoms with a rash on the face. So, separation in the face. The father takes the basics seminar. He understands how it works with the tracks and snacks on butter cookies at home with his wife. The daughter came and said, oh, could I eat the cookies like you do? The father remembers the tracks and says to his child, you can, your little soul can take it. The child tastes such a butter cookie, waits 5 minutes, usually she would already blossom. Nothing happens, the child eats the cookie jar empty without reacting. A huge hello in the family. What? The child no longer has allergies. Then the mother wanted to know. She cooks pasta with cheese sauce. The child tastes some cheese sauce, waits and does not react. She eats the plate without any reaction. The father declares, the child no longer has an allergy. The cause was as follows, the parents run a healthy food store and have hardly any time for the child, the grandfather raises the child. The parents change their diet and ban all dairy products. The grandfather says to his son, in the presence of the girl, what? You don't give your daughter any more milk, but it's so healthy. I have to give the child twice as much. The father. Grandpa, if you give my daughter milk, I won't let her see you anymore. And that was the separation conflict of the girl, actually of the grandpa with the milk track. 3 years later, the parents restore their diet, drink milk, eat cheese. But with the child, the track remained hanging in the air. It wasn't until the father said, you can, your little soul can take it, that the child realized, ah well, he'll keep letting me see grandpa. And that definitely solved the conflict, it dissolved the track. And she could immediately have dairy without reacting. A mother and a daughter come to Hummer. Actually, it was about the mother, but with the 30-year-old daughter I see palm-sized eczema on the right ankle, on the outside. I speak to her about it and she says, that she has had it since India for 3 years. She got infected in India. Yes, that's still the old way of thinking, you think microbes are lurking there, and then you get jumped, and then these microbes settle there, build villages and satellite towns and highways, and was back and forth. That's kind of how it is in our head. But we can translate the organ level, she is left-handed. The right leg is the mother-child leg. She has no children, so only the mother comes into question. Skin means separation. The skin organ inside means, not wanting to be separated. Skin organ outside means, I want to be separated. In this case from the mother. Eczema means healing, she got that in India. That is, in India, she was able to separate from her mother for the first time. We can translate the organ level, and it was also about the mother. The mother was very dominant, she had to raise her 3 children alone, her husband died early in a mountain accident. And the mother was so dominant, that when her children were adults, she wanted to help determine which partner her children could choose. One of her sons got involved with a woman to teach the mother a lesson, that's how the siblings told it. The daughter also said, "Mother, and with this man, I'm going to India." That was the first time she sort of broke away from her mother. And we had only talked about the conflict. A month later, she writes an email, "The eczema has disappeared." And that is because she has married this man in the meantime. And he gets along very well with his mother-in-law. I was also amazed, there are strange things. And if the two get along well, the daughter has no reason at all to want to separate from her mother. One just has to become aware of that. The last healing phase ended, and the symptom was gone in a few days. The sun allergy is the outer skin, with the track sun. A therapist organized a series of seminars for me, from spring to summer on Rugen. On the last seminar day in August, she speaks about her sun allergy. She had a severe sun allergy for 6 years. As a therapist she tried everything, and nothing helped except avoiding the track. And now with the seminars, she found her conflict. That was 6 years ago, she was doing healing fasting walks around the island, with her clients. She had a small group, and she had an enlightened one in the group with her. Well, he was completely enlightened. He ate only white bread and olive oil, and he said, "Women are energetically dark in the genital area." He says to her, "You too, you are dark down there." She says, "What do you want, you stupid idiot?" And she retreats to a rock in the blazing sun, and sulks there all day. She got an extreme sunburn, so that in the evening she came crawling back to him all meek and said, "Give me some of that olive oil so I can smear myself." So, there she had suffered a separation conflict, she wanted to be separated. And the guy had died 3 years ago, she knew that too. So he's in nirvana now, the thing can't happen like that again. And our last seminar day was in August. It was summer, and she didn't react to the sun anymore, because it just can't happen anymore. That's also the case with a sun allergy. Now there is the phenomenon, you can welcome the track and thereby prevent a recurrence. For example, I like to drink water directly from the tap. I clamp under the tap and let it run into me. I'm right-handed, that's the only way I can do it. Otherwise, I can't hit my mouth. And for years, the right side of my mouth twitched. As soon as I get under the water tap, the side of my mouth twitches. I also tried to hold it tight. But it still twitched. And that's why I first became aware that I had it. Twitching with the musculature, that is a motor conflict, that must be explained with Hummer. I must have suffered a motor conflict with this muscle group while drinking under the tap, and I knew the conflict immediately. And that was my father, who was such an all-round genius. He had installed the faucets incorrectly at home, there was hot water on the right. I wedged myself under the faucet, and someone had previously run the hot water. I turned on the faucet and scalded my mouth. This is of course highly acute, isolative and caught on the wrong foot. You can't get away. And that's how I became aware of it. I think to myself, what happens if I now go to this strange faucet, make sure the right is cold, the whole faucet is cold. If I turn on the right, hot water can't possibly come. And I do that, I make sure, and I could drink for the first time without this muscle group twitching. Yeah, the first time. I think to myself, wow, Helmut, you're good. A few days later at night, I was a little thirsty. After a few beers, I stumble into the bathroom and clamp under the tap, it twitches. And since then, if I make sure beforehand that it's cold, I can drink without twitching. If I forget because perhaps I have been drinking, it twitches. Early warning system, watch out, that time you scalded your mouth, watch out. It's genius, right? I am a software engineer, I come from software engineering. I have programmed industrial equipment and developed control programs for machines and things like that. This is ingenious, isn't it? This program, this early warning system. This is an early warning system. Nature has set that up superbly. The one who wrote this software about life, fantastic. Discovering that is not bad either. To parrot that, that's not such an art. And now there's also the phenomenon that you can solve side tracks like that, so if you can't solve the main track, you can at least solve the side tracks. My brother-in-law's red wine allergy. He had a track to a certain red wine from the New Zealand Sea. His stomach stopped digesting. And at night, he vomited the food undigested. He could drink any other red wine. But if he drank this one, and one sip was enough, he would throw up during the night. Then he knew that it could only be this red wine again. In 1999 we came to talk about the story. He says that he used to be able to drink red wine until he got drunk on it. Since then he can no longer drink this wine. I say to him, this has not primarily to do with the red wine, but red wine is only the track. We must conclude the conflict from the organ symptom. Vomiting is typically the small curvature of the stomach. At that time you suffered a territorial anger during this drunken stupor. In the process your brain stored red wine. What was that? He tells us that it was a party. He was with his girlfriend at a festival, and at this festival he finds out that his best friend had an affair with his girlfriend. And this is, by the way, a picture-perfect territorial anger conflict. The woman is cheating, it's the classic territorial anger. In 1999 I thought to myself, you know a little bit from the diagnosis chart, and I told him what must have happened there. And then actually, such a story results. A month later, he says, Helmut, I can drink the red wine, and he can drink it to this day. He doesn't react anymore. Namely the girlfriend, he left her then. And his best friend had a fatal traffic accident a few years ago. The thing can't happen like that anymore. And all these years, we thought the matter was settled. He can still drink red wine today. Then he was recently in a mountain hut with his wife, Veronica. And the landlord of the hut was hitting on Veronica. And my brother-in-law, that night he was puking without red wine. And that is the most common track, if the woman is cheating. But he is very fortunate, Veronica does not cheat. If she would cheat, my brother-in-law would be a candidate for a stomach ulcer. He can avoid this main track. He would have to weld a chastity belt on Veronica. But that's not right either. You don't really do that. And I'm pretty sure that if I hit on Veronica, so he could see, then he would throw up every night. That would be almost the perfect murder. They can never link it to me, because Germanische Heilkunde is not recognized. By the way, now I have really come across the perfect murder. You only need to send him for a checkup, and the rest will be done by conventional medicine. So if you want to get rid of your mother-in-law, all you have to do is tell her, Mother-in-law, don't you want to get checked again? I'm so worried about you. A bit macabre, isn't it? Now a somewhat more embarrassing story, concerns myself. But I would like to point out this subtlety of the tracks once again. That is something very subtle. You have to find that first. I was in negotiation with my wife for years about having a fifth child. Yes, I wanted a fifth child. But my wife always vetoed it and argued that she wouldn't do that to herself in the small apartment. But then, when the house is ready, we can talk about it again. In 2004, the house was ready, the facade, windows, roof, all finished. Only inside, everything was still missing. And I had this Voyager, just a week, brand new. And we were busy in bed, and my wife doesn't take a pill and says, attention, dangerous, ovulation. I say, never mind, you'll get pregnant. And my wife says, whoa, no. And she kicks me out of bed. In the process, I reacted with 3 programs. With the prostate, ugly semigenital. Ugly is clear, semigenital means, the sexual theme is not the core of the problem, but resonates. My wife does not refuse me, but she did not want to get pregnant. Then I reacted with the skin, with separation on the feet, both sides. And with the lumbar spine and the pelvis, with the bone. The pelvis represents the baby. The left pelvic crest and the sacrum. The sacrum is also the sexual self-value collapse. For 10 days, the house was in the wrong way. And then you reconcile again in bed. The first thing I resolved was the skin. And I got a thick red run on my feet. Half the instep and half the sole of the foot, on both sides. And I was at that time with my brain CT with Siegfried Moore. Because Hummer was in prison, and this Siegfrieder drops the remark, how can one associate such a separation? Well, at the feet where one pushes off. I think I don't need to describe it in more detail. And both sides because I wanted to have a child, therefore both sides. About 2 months later, we used an excavator to lay the driveway to the house. I swear I didn't lift a single one of those stones, that was the excavator. With the driveway, the image of the house has changed and changed immensely. When the work was done the next day, I couldn't get up out of the chair. I had a slip disc that I ended up in the crutches. For a month, I lectured like that at 10 centimeters increments and getting in and out of the car, both a horror. And then I went to a chiropractor. He only moved my left leg, and I was able to throw away the crutches. But I got into a hanging healing in the process. When I walked, I was stiff as a board after 10 minutes. Bending over, or squatting, or lifting my left leg was impossible. This went on for 4 years, from 2004 to 2008. And my luck is, I know my conflict. Back on the highway I think to myself, why do I always have such back pain just driving a car? As if the car was the track, but the car was in the yard at the time, and I was in bed at the time when I suffered the conflict. And suddenly, the scales fell from my eyes. What is a drop-in self-value? I give my wife a new house and car, and she kicks me out of bed. What else do I have to offer? That was my self-devaluation conflict. And the car and the house were in my head. And the promise was, when the house is finished. And when the driveway was finished being laid, that was a massive piece of progress, and I got into healing. Then I also understood. I often lay for a week and could not move. For example, when the staircase was finished. I didn't put in a screw, that was the company. But the staircase, that was an immense step towards the finished house. The stepladder was removed. There was a lot of change. And I was flat for a week and couldn't move. The house and the car were the track. After that week, I could climb up and down the high wall again. Since then I can lift my leg, and I can bend over. The pain is gone, let's say 95%. So as I said, if you haven't experienced it yourself, you don't believe it. That is a relief. And then observe that for 1 year, to see if that would last. And in 2009 I started to talk about it at the seminar. In 2010 I sent Hummer a brain CT of mine. And he said, "Helmut, your prostate is active." And I said, yes, that's what Siegfried Moore told me at that time. Only I haven't had any symptoms since then. Suddenly it occurs to me, yes, for half a year I have to get up at night, I think I have to pee, but not much comes. Or rather I had to push full blast for anything to come at all. And the prostate is also moving. Did I, by talking about this, maintain this active conflict for myself? And this is not a trifle for me. I made a huge mistake. Then in 2010 my wife said to me, "Helmut, if it's so important to you, then we'll just have another child." And I travel a lot. The first time I came home too late for ovulation. The second time I had to leave too early. But suddenly the prostate symptoms were gone. My wife didn't have to get pregnant at all. She just had to keep quiet, just not kick me out. I have a very thoughtful wife. There is a saying, behind a strong man, there is a strong woman. And I can only confirm that. I don't know if I am strong, but my wife is the center of the family. Then in 2015, we were invited to Dr. Hummer's 80th birthday in Norway. And there, he gave me the green light for the webinars. I thought, now it's going to take off. Now I'm getting into every living room. Let's put it this way, Dr. Hummer was always against it, oddly enough. He never really used the internet, he never really used the option about videos. I didn't understand why, but he was the boss and this was his discovery, and I had to respect that. But he appointed me as his lecturer. And I am described as the one who can convey the Germanische Heilkunde most faithfully. And in principle I will not change my strategy, only I will now increasingly use these videos and the internet and Vimeo. So, what technologies I use for my seminars I can decide myself now, and there was the plan, that Dr. Hummer himself should also give webinars. And for years we still wanted an extension, so with a carport, a bit of a workshop, and a greenhouse. The Voyager has also run 450,000 kilometers in the meantime. I had a building plan drawn and approved by the municipality. I had also already gotten a quote for a new van. But suddenly it doesn't work with the webinars. Right at the beginning I had 600 participants booked for the first webinar. I thought now the post goes off. But just one day before the first webinar, the webinar platform provider canceled my contract, they disagreed with the topic, and the webinars that was completely declined. And in the fall of 2015 I got brutal back pain. Exactly the same back pain from back then. It took me a whole month to recover. So in hindsight, I don't even understand why it had taken me that long. A month until I figured out the track, house and car. It was the same issue again. And then I even figure out, that every time I see this stupid new van on the highway, I have back pain afterward. So, the conflict was in 2004 with the track, car and house. And in 2015, 11 years later, do you think you could identify the track? Aha, whenever I see this van I have back pain afterward, which points to the conflict 11 years ago. You can't possibly find that out on your own. I can't imagine that. But, if you follow these programs from the beginning and pay attention to the details. Let's put it this way. Knowledge doesn't protect you from conflict, even the symptoms follow on your heels. But then you still have the conflict fresh in your mind. As I said, the eczema that was 10 days later. The one with the spine, that was about 2.5 months later, 3 months. But even then, the conflict is still fresh in your mind. You then still know what to look for. But finding the conflict 11 years later and the tracks that go with it. I cannot imagine that. Again, that only works through recognition. By the way, I then built a small extension and I bought the van. Another newspaper article, what does conventional medicine say? This is from a car magazine. They have medical articles all the time too, but anyway, it's all centrally controlled. As much as is known today about diagnosis, the process, and therapies, the causes are not very clear. There is some evidence that the tendency is inherent. A connection between psychological conflicts and an allergic outbreak has been discussed for years, but has not yet been proven. What could be proven so far in conventional medicine? Nothing. But Hummer can be proven. Or one could also try to disprove Hummer. Dr. Hummer has kept the rules of the game. In our society, the university is the final authority. The Germanische Heilkunde was verified and found correct in the University of Vienna, in the University of Trnava, and at the University of Düsseldorf. And Germanische Heilkunde is now considered to be correct until it is disproved. Now it is the turn of conventional medicine. But they cannot and simply refuse. And those who do not play the game have lost. Thus, the Germanische Heilkunde is the state of real science. Only unfortunately, it is consistently suppressed. Or here. Our goal is to cure allergies causally, through vaccination. Where do they know a cause? Nowhere. But vaccination is causal? So, but now we must finish. I thank you for your interest and participation. I hope it was informative again, and you could take something home with you. Helmut Pilhar. Father of Olivia,